On the last weekend of May this year, the State Department decided it would be a good idea to issue guidance to all U.S. embassies and consulates throughout the world, telling our diplomatic personnel that they were not only allowed, but strongly encouraged to celebrate Pride Month by flying rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter flags right next to the U.S. flag. Now, what the hell Black Lives Matter has to do with Pride Month, I do not know, but that's a different question for a different time. And so, on the morning of Tuesday, the 2nd of June, the residents of Kabul, Afghanistan were greeted with a big rainbow flag flying atop the U.S. embassy there. This was, of course, less than 90 days from the planned withdrawal of our troops from that country, a time during which U.S. credibility among the Afghan populace was more crucially important than it ever had been before, a time during which any loss of credibility or confidence could have been absolutely disastrous in terms of its consequences, since we were hoping to leave behind some semblance of a functioning Afghan nation-state in exchange for our expenditure of $2 trillion and something like 6,000 American lives. So this should have been a time when we were doing anything and everything to not piss off the Afghan people. You know, the Afghan people who are ultra-conservative Muslims who live in an ultra-conservative Muslim country. And what did we do? We shoved a goddamn rainbow flag in their faces. We actually did that. And then, of course, all the people responsible for the stunt furiously backslapped themselves on Twitter, showering one another in bushel loads of mad upvotes because aren't we so progressive and virtuous? We are bringing diversity, equity, and inclusion to the people in this world who need it the most. We are shining the light of our moral righteousness into the deepest recesses of patriarchal backwardness. Hell, let's go ahead and give each other some more upvotes, shall we? Because this is great. But while those people were all busy vomiting out nauseating self-congratulatory pablum, did it ever cross any of their feeble little minds how the image of a rainbow flag flying from the U.S. Embassy in their nation's capital was likely to be interpreted by the local Afghan population? Or were they too busy dreaming about those mad Twitter upvotes and the nice pat on the head they were going to get from their woke bosses back in Washington? Because the more I think about it, I am hard-pressed to think of anything stupider, more wrong-headed, more oblivious, more consciously hostile to our own stated goals in Afghanistan than to fly a rainbow flag from our embassy in Kabul 3 months before our anticipated military withdrawal. Now, how stupid can some people actually be who run the diplomatic apparatus of the most powerful country in the history of civilization? Because to the average Afghan on the street, you know what that rainbow flag says to them? It says, fuck you, fuck your religion, fuck your values, and fuck your country. If we had flown a flag depicting the Prophet Muhammad with purple hair and a nose ring, wearing a pink feather boa, fornicating with a goat, it would have had just about the same effect. And look, we know there is not much going on in Joe Biden's head, but there isn't one professional diplomat in the entire State Department who was willing to speak up and say what a bad, terrible, horrible, awful idea this was. What exactly was this stunt supposed to achieve, anyway? What was the desired real-world effect of hoisting a hooray for homosexuality flag in the capital city of the world's most conservatively Muslim country? Were we trying to make the Taliban discover their suppressed genderqueer feelings that have always been bubbling under the surface of their hard masculine exterior? They'll forget about trying to overrun the country because they'll be too preoccupied with discovering the joys of slathering each other in baby oil and playing naked twister until it's time for evening prayers? Now, how could flying that flag redound to any possible positive ramification for the success of our efforts in that country? And did any of our handsomely well-compensated diplomatic professionals even give it that much thought? Or was it like everything else in our modern life, that is to say, well, it'll get me mad upvotes on Twitter, so that's the only thing that matters. Hey, how about next week we fly a flag of a T-bone steak over our embassy in New Delhi? How about a hooray for Gandhi flag over our embassy in Pakistan? How about a provisional IRA flag in Belfast? How about a We Hate Soccer flag in Rio? How about a Mandela Sucks flag in Cape Town? Because if our intent is to make the locals resent us as much as possible, then hell, we might as well go big or go home, right? Hey, what? Jim Eagle says we should fly a Gretzky is overrated flag over our embassy in Ottawa. It's about time you had a good idea for a change, eh? I'll go hit the music and grab me a Tim Hortons before I fire your ass. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where you can calm down Canada, it's not like I made a joke about Terry Fox or something serious. I know where to draw the line when I am poking fun at someone's national icons. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And we're doing a very special episode tonight, wherein we are going to rank the most disastrous 6-month periods that have ever been experienced by presidents of the United States. We have 8 contestants in the field tonight, formidable competitors all, so it's difficult to say who the winner might be. But that's a lie, actually. Because you already know exactly who the winner is going to be, who's taking home the gold. In fact, this process is so rigged, it makes a California election look like a free, open, transparent exercise in legitimate, non-corrupt democracy. And we have 8 contestants in our field, and we will take them in ascending order of disastrousness. Bear in mind also, we're talking here about any 6-month period in a presidency, and not just the opening 6 months. And admittedly, I did play a little bit loose with the 6-month limitation. Some of these are closer to 7 or 8 months, so don't get all nitpicky and pedantic with me, because pedantic nitpickery is my department and not yours. And with that, let's begin the proceedings. Give me a drum roll, Jim Eagle. Shit, I forgot. I sent him to Canada to get me a cup of coffee. I can do my own damn drum roll. Leading off at number 8, Woodrow Wilson, October 1919 to March 1920. Mr. Wilson was riding pretty high, or at least he thought he was, at the beginning of October 1919. He had been rapturously received over in France at the Versailles Conference. He had been greeted like a conquering hero when he returned home, and it looked, to all intents and purposes, like he had personally solved the issue of world peace for all time, because these 14 points and this League of Nations thing, they're going to fix everything. It's time to soak up the accolades and the approbation and to take your place among the great statesmen and peacemakers of world history. And then, on 2 October 1919, well, shit started going sideways in a really big way. For on that day, the 63-year-old President Wilson suffered a devastating, debilitating stroke from which he never recovered and which rendered him an invalid for the remainder of his presidency, and his life. But the public, the press, even the Congress, they never knew a thing about it, for it was much easier to keep such things under wraps in those days. But even though the president had become a drooling vegetable who could no longer feed himself or wipe his own backside, I know that sounds familiar, but I'm not talking about Joe Biden yet. The bad news did not stop coming. 28 October 1919, the Volstead Act is passed by Congress, which set forth the terms of alcohol prohibition per the 18th Amendment, and of course gave birth to organized crime as a billion-dollar industry in its own right. 10 December 1919, Wilson is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which was only slightly less absurd than the one they gave to Obama. 2 January 1920, the first Red Scare begins. Law-abiding Americans are arrested and thrown in prison for having the wrong political views. 10 January 1920, the Covenant of the League of Nations comes into effect, which Wilson regards, of course, as his greatest achievement, but with no U.S. membership, as the Versailles Treaty still awaits ratification by the Congress. 19 March 1920, Congress refuses to ratify the Versailles Treaty. The United States will not be a member of the League of Nations. Wilson's entire legacy is down the shitter, but he's still the most virulently racist president of the post-Civil War era, so that at least counts for something, right? Next up, number 7, James Madison, March 1814 to September 1814. Madison was an estimable man and all things considered a fine president, but when our national capital gets put to the torch by a foreign invader on your watch, then you make this list. 30 March 1814, the Battle of Lacole Mills. The War of 1812 had been going pretty well for our guys up to this point, but on this day, the British garrison turned back and attempted U.S. invasion, and it began a string of victories for their side that culminated with the White House going up in flames. 20 July 1814, the Siege of Prairie du Chien. American fort besieged and captured by the Brits. 25 July 1814, the Battle of Lundy's Lane. U.S. forces have to withdraw after a pitched battle that lasts the entire night. 4 August 1814, the Battle of Mackinac Island. British forces repel an attempted U.S. invasion of British North America. 13 August 1814, British victory at the Battle of Lake Huron. 24 August 1814, Washington, D.C. is sacked, looted, and burned by a bunch of British wankers and Canadian hosers in what to this day remains Canada's greatest military victory of all time. President Madison and his cabinet are forced to flee the capital on horseback with about 30 minutes to spare. 13 September 1814, the British bombard Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor with all the weapons the Royal Navy can throw at it, but the defenders hold, bringing Madison's bad 6 months to an end. And a witness to that battle, a fellow named Mr. Key, writes a song about it that you may have heard. At number 6, Herbert Hoover, March 1929 to October 1929. Because you knew this guy was going to be on this list, didn't you? 4 March 1929, Hoover is sworn into office. 5 June 1929, the farm crisis of 1929-30 begins, probably the biggest precursor to what became the Great Depression, and the federal government insists that no direct action needs to be taken. Free market forces will sort the thing out if we just leave well enough alone. 15 July 1929, the Federal Farm Board is established and meets for the first time. They take no action except for agreeing to have more meetings so they can talk about more things, thus establishing the proud federal government tradition of solving pressing issues of national importance by having meetings and talking about things. 18 October 1929, the Dow Jones Index loses 2.51% of its volume. Investors start to engage in panic selling. 21 October, the Dow loses 3.71%. A record 3.1 million shares trade hands. 23 October, the Dow loses 6.3%. Margin calls start going in. 28 October, the Dow loses 12.82%. Bank runs begin. 29 October, the day that became known as Black Tuesday, the Dow loses another 11.73%. Banks go bust nationwide. Millions of people have their life savings wiped out. The Great Depression officially begins. Number 5. Jimmy Carter, November 79 to April 1980. And yeah, you knew Jimmy Carter was going to be on this list just as sure as Herbie Hooves was. But if I'm being honest, Carter has 3 or 4 different 6-month stretches that could each qualify for this list in their own right. So, 4 November 1979, the U.S. Embassy in Tehran is overrun by Islamic radical revolutionaries. 51 Americans begin an ordeal in captivity that will last 444 days. 7 April 1979, the U.S. severs relations with Iran because that'll make it easier to get our people out, and we now have to use frickin' Switzerland as an intermediary. That's almost as brilliant as flying a rainbow flag above your embassy in Afghanistan. 15 April 1979. Planning begins for a hostage rescue operation called Operation Eagle Claw. It's such a shitty idea, has so little chance of success, that Secretary of State Cyrus Vance threatens to resign if it's given the green light. 24 April 1980. Operation Eagle Claw fails spectacularly and becomes one of the most embarrassing blunders in U.S. military history. 25 April. President Carter goes on TV in a nationally televised Oval Office address and tries to slather some lipstick on that pig, but the pig is still just as ugly as it was before. 27 April, Secretary of State Vance resigns in disgust, just like he said he would. Number 4, James Buchanan, March 1857 to October 1857. If there's any point of broad consensus among presidential historians, it's that Buchanan, if he's not the actual worst president in history, is definitely on the medal stand of presidential ignominy. Like Joe Biden, his historically awful 6 months began at the moment of his swearing in. 4 March 1857, Buchanan is sworn in, the nation's 15th president. 6 March, 2 days into his presidency, the Supreme Court hands down the ruling in the Dred Scott case, which puts the country squarely on the fast track toward an armed conflict between the states over the issue of slavery. 24 August 1857, the Panic of 1857 begins with the sudden, unexpected collapse of the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company. The resulting economic downturn hits the northern states much harder than it hits the southern states, to the point where the South feels like its economy is propping up that of the North, which only increases secessionist sentiments. 13 October 1857, all the banks in New York City close through 12 December, which makes everything worse. The Buchanan administration takes no action of any kind, hoping it'll all just go away. Stop me if any of that sounds eerily familiar. Number 3, Richard Nixon, January 1974 to August 1974. And yeah, you know where that story ends, but let's tell it anyway. 29 January 1974, former White House Chief of Staff John Ehrlichman, under criminal indictment for 2 counts of conspiracy related to the Watergate break-in, requests that President Nixon be subpoenaed to testify in his trial. 1 March 1974, additional indictments are handed down on Ehrlichman, plus new indictments on Bob Haldeman, Charles Colson, and John Mitchell. So now everybody in Nixon's inner circle, except Nixon himself, is under criminal indictment. 29 March 1974, Nixon agrees to comply with the search warrant issued by the Watergate special prosecutor. 29 July 1974, the House Judiciary Committee votes 28-10 to recommend the president's impeachment. 9 August 1974, Nixon resigns in disgrace, but with more dignity than we got from Andy Cuomo. Number 2, Lyndon Baines Johnson, January 68 to August 68. You have to hand it to LBJ, for he just barely missed out on taking the top spot. He had a first half of 1968 that was the mother of all dog shit sandwiches. 23 January 68, the USS Pueblo incident. A Navy spy ship is captured by North Korea, its crew of 82 officers and men taken hostage and not repatriated until December. 30 January 68, the Tet Offensive begins. The U.S. is caught on the back foot, totally unprepared, and the Vietnam War enters its most bloody stage. 16 March 1968, the My Lai massacre, the worst set of atrocities ever committed by U.S. military personnel. 31 March 68, President Johnson, in a shocking move nobody expected, announced he will not seek and will not accept the nomination of his party for a second term. 5 June 68, Senator Robert Kennedy is assassinated in Los Angeles. And even though LBJ hated the Kennedys and the feeling was mutual, this eliminates any real chance that the Democrats had of retaining the presidency that year, which makes Johnson look a lot worse than he already did. 20 August 1968, taking note of the fact that the Americans have a weak lame duck president, the Soviets march right into Prague and take over the whole of Czechoslovakia. There is no meaningful response from NATO or from the Americans. 22 August 68, the Democrat National Convention in Chicago turns into a 3-day orgy of rioting and bloodshed and lawlessness. The sort of thing we call a mostly peaceful protest today. And at number 1, the champion of champions, the Hefe of all the Hefes, could it be any other than President Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., January 21 to the present day. Joe Biden was a 6th-term U.S. Senator, and you don't get to be a 6th-term U.S. Senator unless 1, you believe in absolutely nothing, 2, you are a thoroughly unexceptional person with meager at best talents, and 3, you know how to vomit out the fashionable political catchphrases of the day, whatever they may be. And one of the most venerable catchphrases we have ever had in this country is the canard of energy independence. Now, if I had a nickel for every time I heard Senator Joe Biden, back when he was a former segregationist hair sniffer, paying lip service to how badly he wanted us to be energy independent, well, suffice it to say I would have a shit ton of nickels. When President Joe Biden took office, that dream had been realized already. Not only were we energy independent, we were energy dominant. We were meeting our own needs domestically, and we were also the world's #1 exporter of energy. But what was President Joe Biden's first order of business on his first day, aside from having an ice cream cone and a nap? He gave back our energy independence. And now we are right back to begging OPEC to increase production, right back to gas lines and prices that double every year, right back to the Middle East entanglements that people like Senator Joe Biden used to insist they didn't want. And when President Joe Biden took office, there was no illegal immigration crisis. The previous administration's policies were working really fabulously well. If you were an asylum claimant, you waited in Mexico for your case to be adjudicated. If you were infected with COVID, you damn well were not getting into the country under any circumstances. The wall was working and we were nearly done building it. So what did President Joe Biden do? He stopped construction on the wall when it would cost less to actually finish it, and the funds were already allocated. There is no sane rationale behind anything Joe Biden's administration has done since he incoherently mumbled the oath of office back on 20 January. Why? Because Trump derangement syndrome is now our national governing philosophy. And you thought things were crazy when it was just a mental condition that afflicted the opposition party and the fake news media? But now it's the pole star, the guiding light of the entire federal government. The orange man is bad, therefore all his policies are bad, therefore if we reverse all his policies, things will be good. It sounds like kindergarten level thinking, because it is. But that's where we are. So if you know people, and you probably do, who voted for this semi-animated corpse for no better reason than because, Trump's tweets are so awful. If you know people who are so dumb, who've been paying so little attention to Joe Biden's 50-year career as a bumbling buffoon that they thought this doddering dotard was going to be a return to normalcy and some sort of loving grandfather for the nation who won't stop sniffing your hair until you forcefully rip yourself away from his clutches, then tell that person they have no right to complain about rising prices or about our national prestige being in the toilet or any damn other thing, because this is what they chose. They picked this, and you should rub their face in it every chance you get, just like you're an Afghan Muslim and you're a stupid rainbow flag waving majestically over the U.S. Embassy. Thanks for watching. See you Wednesday. Get off my lawn.